This is a production of Cornell University.
Thanks, Carol. Sometimes they try to blow the balloon up bigger than it really is. I think she just did. But yeah, we're always looking at innovative ways to try and improve crop production and soil health. And in my earlier years, soil health was not a big concern. That cover crops, that was nothing you really paid attention to. But as time went on, looking at what I thought was the demise or lessening of crop production in the area, that's when I started focusing on cover crops and soil health, and reduced tillage was a key part of it. But everything we've done seems to have had positive impact on our bottom line. Our yields every year seem to be getting better. Inputs seem to be going down somewhat, if you want to say. Nutrient management's an important part of it. Focusing on banning all the nutrients we can. Our chemical dependency, yes, we're still dependent on chemicals, but with our reduced tillage methods and cover crops, we found we've been able to reduce some of the herbicide application rates. Instead of being on the maximum end of scales, be to the medium or lower end of scales. But I think I've said enough. Right now I'm going to introduce Wally's. If I butcher anybody's names, I apologize, but
it's not even here, you don't have to say it.
yeah, but they're taping this and recording it. But Wally Zakowski and Mike Zignat. Mike's the field manager. They started using zone tillage about 3 years ago. They farm about 180 acres, including vine crops, tobaccos, cabbage, and broccoli. They've used zone tillage on pumpkins and winter squash. They've been very pleased with the results thus far, especially with spaghetti squash, planted on a heavy rye residue. They've shared their equipment with 3 neighbors and have also heard positive results. While it doesn't look like yields are different, which I wouldn't expect, but they didn't experience a yield drag apparently, there's much less wind erosion and better drought tolerance in fields that were zone tilled. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Mike. He's going to explain the operation. Thank you.
How's everybody doing today? My name's Mike. Like just said, Plainville Farm in Hadley, Mass. We're down in the Connecticut River Valley. We have an extreme problem with soil compaction down there. The reason we got into zone till was we grow one of our main crops is butternut squash, and we had 1 year where we ended up not being able to sell a lot of it. We also peel it, but we were not able to sell a lot of it due to a lot of ground stain. So we started looking around, and the zone tillage actually seemed like it would be a pretty good idea to get into for us for that reason. So the first year we ended up finding a used machine due to the price of a new one. We made it suit our needs. Most of our compaction was probably from 15 to 19 inches down, so we set the machine for about 22 inches, so we wouldn't have a problem with anything. And it seemed to do all right the first year. We tried it on a few acres, about 5 acres of butternut, and a couple acres of the spaghetti squash. The real difference we saw was more in the spaghetti squash actually than in the butternut. The spaghetti squash seemed to not have anywhere near the ground scarring and was a lot cleaner than we had expected. The cover crops weren't that great the first year though. Due to not previously planning on buying a machine, we had to work with what we had from the year before, which was the cover crops weren't as thick as they should have been, but it was a good trial experience anyway. The second year that we used it, we increased our acreage a little bit. We went to about 4 acres of spaghetti. I think it was about 10 acres of butternut, and we also tried a few acres of sugar pumpkins. The butternut, once again, we didn't really see any yield differences, but time-wise, instead of spending a day and a half longer to prep the field before we could plant it, if I started about 15 minutes before Wally, who was doing most of the planting, I could stay well ahead of him with the machine, which, it's just better ground moisture, less time, less fuel, less aggravation, which that time of year is a good thing to have less of. For side dressing, we didn't have a machine set up for side dressing, so we ended up taking one of our Williston cultivators, a 2-row Williston, and we took all the rollers off of it, bought an old potato fertilizer hopper with the transmission, mounted it on top of it, and we had 2 double disc openers that we put on the side of it, and we it worked out really well. We moved the disc openers about 2 inches to each side of the plants, and we were only a couple inches in the ground, and it worked out really well. It was enough to cover the dry fertilizer and not disturb the soil too much, so that the cover crop was still there doing what it was supposed to be doing. Once again, the quality was a big factor with this. The third year was that was 2009. That was an extremely wet year, and this machine really showed what it could do in that year. We had fields that were planted with butternut that were next to another field of butternut, and our field had hardly any water standing in it compared to the one that was next to it. Same dips, same knolls, a lot of rolling ground, and the disease pressure seemed to be a little bit less. Not a lot, but enough to make a difference, where we actually sprayed 1 time less than the fellow next to us. And the other big factor was when we went through and sprayed the fields, we weren't sinking in up to a foot and a half with the sprayer like the other fella went through the fields were, which makes a difference in the end too. The product that year was all right. I mean, nobody had a real good year that year where we were, and the quality, we store a lot of the butternut, and the quality seemed to hold up pretty good. It wasn't the best, but like I say, it was a tough year. Every year, the only thing I can say is every year that we've been using the machine, we're finding the more that we use it, the more we like it, the more things we're trying it on, the more luck we're having with it. And to be honest with you, we really haven't found anything we don't like about using it. It's an easy machine to use. It's adjustable to a wide variety of crops. The one thing that we noticed last year, this past season, with it being as dry as it was wind erosion. Out where we are, there's a lot of guys that grow sweet corn and a lot of conventional tillage. And when we were planting our squash, a lot of the sweet corn fields were tilled, and there was a couple days there where it looked like a sandstorm out there. You couldn't even see the plant. But when you drove by the zone till field, there was hardly any sand blowing. There's a lot to be said for that. The plants didn't get wind whipped, not from our field. They did get a little wind whip from the other guys on the other sides of us, of course. But it was interesting to see how the way it worked that year as well. We did notice a difference too in the butternut that was on zone till versus a conventional. That the plants were healthier. They seemed to, for whatever reason, either get down to the water more, or I don't know what their reasoning behind it was, but it seemed to work out very well for us. The fruit quality was excellent. The yields were where they should have been. They were up a little bit on our land that we had the zone till on versus the conventional fields, only because the plants seem to survive a lot better. The one thing that that we're going to try this upcoming year, using the zone till, the one thing that I can't stress enough is that as much as you use the zone till, the row cleaners on the front of your planter are just as important as the zone till is. If you're going through heavy rye, we actually, on the spaghetti squash, we have, because it's planted a little bit later, the rye is usually taller and then it mats down, and the zone till, the 2 discs in the basket will actually ride over that matted rye to a certain extent. And what happens is when the planter goes through, the first couple of years we didn't have the row cleaners on there, and we ended up having to stock it over. And we went to a couple of meetings, sessions during the winter, and after that we ended up, it was brought to our attention that the row cleaners are important, and we ended up putting them on. And since we've done that, we haven't had to stock over or restock a field. It's been a blessing. The thing in the future coming down the road, what we hope to do this year, we're actually going to end up putting row cleaners on the zone till machine, only because of the thickness of the rye. We don't really see where it's going to affect anything else. Every little bit helps, and we're shooting like one of the machines that Anu showed had a fertilizer hopper on it, and we're going to start playing with banding some dry fertilizers, only because every year the price of fertilizer keeps going through the roof, especially guys that are growing corn with the potash this year, I guess, is going to be phenomenal. And any little bit of money we can save down the road is money in our pocket. So and then what we hope to really do is do a one-pass tillage with mounting a couple of vacuum units behind the row units, so that one pass down the field will literally take care of everything. That's what we're striving for. That's probably 2-3 years down the road, a little bit every year, but that's hopefully where we aim to be in a couple of years. And like I say, the more we've used it, the more we love it. And I can't anybody that talks to me, I can't say anything bad about the machine, and I try to encourage everybody to try it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody got any questions for him, quick?
Yes.
Did you roll the cover crop, or you mowed it?
We just spray it and go right through it. Yep.
You spray it plenty ahead.
Yes, we usually the cover crop we usually spray March, beginning April. As we're not organic, so as early as we can spray it, we will, except for the spaghetti squash, because it's planted a little bit later, so we let the rye and stuff get a little bit bigger. We're starting to experiment also with some. This year we have a lot of sedan grass in, so it'll be interesting to see how that machine will do in sedan grass after being laid down. So, yes.
You're not incorporating any harvest leftovers, so do you see any increase in overwintering insects?
After the one thing we chisel plow all our land after we go through and harvest the crops. What we're aiming to do is try and get away from the harrow, which is non-vertical tillage. Any vertical tillage seems to work better for us. So what we've done in the past is just sow the rye and run over it with a disc chisel, and it seems to work beautiful. The rye, it takes a little bit longer for the rye to come up, but it does come up decent. It's a good stand.
How deep do you go? No.
With the chisel plow, about 12 inches. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. A couple, while he was talking, a couple things he mentioned. Wind erosion. up our way, on these nice winter days, sometimes you can drive up down the roads and you can tell where conventional tillage is done and where reduced tillage is done just by the color of the snowbanks on the horizon. Fertility, he's talking about banding more nutrients this upcoming year. There's been, test results, proven results that banding nutrients get you a much higher efficiency rate. So thus, banding nutrients with a higher efficiency rate, you can use less rates. There's one pass operation, trying to put planter units on the back. We do have some growers. Where I'm from, I'm 100 miles west of here, 20 miles outside of Rochester, New York. And there are some growers off our way growing corn, silage corn, grain corn, that do have planters attached right behind their zone builders and are doing a one-pass operation. My concern is we have a lot of rock that way, and I'm afraid that planter pays a pretty good toll sometimes. Zone builder has a tendency to pull some of those particles up, but they seem to be making it work all right, and it's pretty efficient for them. One pass, one person, one tractor, one pass, and the crop's in the ground. Now we have Joseph Brightly. He's going to give us his overview of what he's been doing. Joe lives in Hamlin, grew up working on his father's farm, Dean P. Brightly Farms, growing processing vegetables, cabbage, and winter squash. He graduated from Cornell in 2009 and enthusiastically tried zone tillage in 2010. His father been kind of stepping on his head a little bit, holding him down a little. Joe's he is enthusiastic. Joe's called me, we've conversed a few times at meetings, on the phone. He's got a real big interest in this reduced tillage and trying to improve the crop production. And, so far he's done a pretty good job. So, Joe, turn it over to you.
Yeah, as Don said, my day gives me enough rope to hang myself. And then as I get close to dying, he pulls me back up. So, I'm Joe Brightly from Hamlin, New York. We're about 25 miles west of Rochester, 5 miles north of Brockport. We strip till about 1,500 acres of mixed grains and vegetables. We use a Case IH 1240 planter for just about all of it. We have a 12-row Brilliant Zone Commander, and we have RTK GPS. The GPS is essential in my mind. It helps the operator see where he's going, even though he can't see. It allows him to look back at the planter. There's a lot more going on, whether it be moving debris, as you said, rocks, and things like that. And at the end of the day, it really does help the operator from looking back like this all the time and trying to focus on where you're going. It makes your life a lot easier. On our planter, we have floating row cleaners, which do whip away the debris. Notice how I say whip away the debris. You don't want to be making trenches. You want to be just lightly moving the debris away. This allows the gauge wheels to move smoothly across the ground, which helps uniform seed depth. Uniform seed depth is essential. You want to have them come up within hours upon each other, which will drive yield. We have pneumatic down pressure, which helps dramatically in different field conditions. Zone tillage, actually the seed bed's a little more mellower than if you go across the ground with a field cultivator and a cultipacker. If you go from one section of the field to the other, on a large field, you'll be able to adjust the down pressure. Now, the best way I found to adjust down pressure is you get the planter down, go back there, you grab the gauge wheel. If you can't turn it at all, you got to lessen the down pressure. If you can spin it freely, you need to increase it. You should be able to just turn it, just a little bit. That's where you want to be. We have a fertilizer coulter on front to band fertilizer. We have a single disc. And you want, if you have a lot of debris, look at non-fluted coulters. Sometimes the coulter discs will hairpin more. If you really have a problem with that, look at straight coulters. And in the back of this coulter, we have an injector. We have used the knife, the shank that goes right behind the coulter, where you press it right up against it. Even though it's compressed right up against it, we've still had issues with corn stalks and other debris getting wedged up in there, creating the coulter to stop turning. And that's a real pain, especially at 7:30 at night. These are the row cleaners. They are floating. See these donuts right here? These are essential for these shark teeth floating row cleaners. If not, they will do a lot of damage by moving debris, sometimes too much. These donuts help put a uniform depth. You can actually also get wider donuts to help if you have really sandy ground. This is the Medic down pressure. This is the airbag in there. It's kind of tough to see. And there's a gauge up front with an air compressor that you can adjust. You can actually do from the cab on some models. So if you're going across the field, you can just adjust it, increase it, or lessen it. Precision planning does have air force, which will actually increase the planer, so it's not pushing down as hard. If you have 100 pounds of seed in the back, it will actually press it up, so it's not bulldozing as much, and lessening sidewall compaction. This is the fertilizer setup. As you can see, this is the injector right here. It's mounted on a spring, so it moves around like a finger. And this is a very lightly fluted coulter. I have not moved to straight coulters yet. I've not had that big of an issue. I've just heard of that. Okay, our strip tiller is a 12-row Brilliant. It can be folded up, and the 6 rows can be run as a deep ripper if you want to run deep. I actually told a fellow to go out there and take away all the stops, and he called me back and said, "Joe, this won't pull it." I said, "Why? It's only 6 rows. It's a 425 horsepower tractor." He goes, "It won't pull it." I go out there and the thing's 34 inches deep in the ground. I'm like, well, that's probably why it's not pulling that well. We run about 12 to 14 inches deep, about 2 inches below the plow pan, and we're going to do this for about 2 or 3 years, and then we are going to shallow it up. I see no need in going down 12 to 14 inches if you get rid of compaction. We'll go 6 to 8 inches where we feel that we need to put down our fertilizer, because we are banding fertilizer deep. We use a straight shank without a parabolic shank in the bottom. We're just creating a slot through the ground to break the compaction when it's wet. As it gets drier, you can use a parabolic shank to kind of shatter it, the plow pan, similar to concrete. We use 2 front coulters that do help size the material. This can be an issue if you have a lot of corn stalks, 200 bushel corn, heavy rye residue. It will plug up in the shank where it goes into the 2 hilling coulters. You need to have 2 front coulters to size this. And you might need to run them pretty aggressively, especially if they will not break up.
How far apart are the coulters?
About 4 or 5 inches. And they're pretty fluted. I think they're an 8-wave coulter, so they're pretty aggressive. And fertilizer, we're running about 8 inches deep. We have tried dual placement with some P&K deep. Can't tell you any results on that. One thing I will say about fertilizer going 8 inches deep. We did some sweet corn 1st of May. We got a lot of rain, and the corn was about 1.5 feet tall, and it was cold. I drive by the field and almost went in the ditch. It was green and yellow. I go out in there, I cannot figure out why. I actually called Donnie, we talked about it, and he said, the thing you gotta realize is that these roots are about 6 inches deep right now, maybe 8 inches, and it's so wet, you're not going deep into getting that fertilizer. So my suggestion for all of you, if you're gonna ban fertilizer, when it's early, or if you have light ground, is put it 6 inches deep. That way the root will get to it. We're also banning fertilizer on the planter, which is essential. But I'm gonna tell you, we're not side dressing any of these crops anymore, and you do not want them to stress at any time, because that will reduce your yield. This is the double coulters in the front. You can see they're pretty aggressive, about 4 to 5 inches apart. This is the shank and the closing discs. Notice the straight point in the bottom. Trust me, it pulls hard enough without the parabolic shank on it. And this is our fertilizer delivery system. We have a 2-port, or this is actually a single-port John Blue piston pump run off of a Trimble True Guide system. It goes from here into a red ball system, and then it goes into these adjustable fertilizer tubes here. Now in the squash, what we did is we went in 2 to 3 weeks in advance on a fallow soybean field from the previous year. We sprayed it down with biphosphate, let it burn down, and we actually did have the disc in some areas where there were ruts. This is what it looked like directly after planting. Notice how there are clumps of dirt and debris whipped away, and that the seed bed looks very nice and mellow and flat. If anything, you want it to be up a little bit. Yeah, there are times when I have had to run my row cleaners deeper. If it's very clumpy, what are you going to do? You got to put it deeper and create a trench. You get good seed to soil contact, or you're going to leave it up high and get poor seed to soil contact. You're going to put it down deeper. This is the squash after emergence. Notice, besides the doubles here, how uniform the emergences, that's what you want to see. You don't want to see some just coming up and some this high. You want to get them all even as you can. And there's actually no crusting on here. We got rain after this and no crusting. For weed management, it's very similar to conventional. Only difference is that we had it burned down first. We used command post plant, and we also used sandia where needed. And the areas that we did cultivate had dramatically more weeds. And I mean to the row. In areas that we did not cultivate, or excuse me, areas that did not disc, we really did not need to cultivate sometimes. The sandia did a very nice job taking out the pigweed and nutgrass, and really didn't have any other weed issues. But we did cultivate, because Daddy said we were gonna. This is in the middle of July. You can see it's got a nice uniform canopy cover. You really can't ask for much more than that in a squash field. For our yields, you can see our strip tilts on the left and conventionals on the right. Notice there are fewer squash over here. And there's more squash over here, but more green squash. And Carol just gave me this piece of paper, and I believe it says in a 10 by 20 area, there was fewer squash over here on the strip tilt, more over here, but these weighed more per squash than these ones, creating a total yield advantage for these, meaning they weighed more. Now I just got a quick slide on snap beans. I don't have any nice pictures or anything, but we did do snap beans. We did a piece right after squash previous year, came out fine. We were very pleased with how they came up. We did not deep band any fertilizer. One thing I'll say that we learned the hard way is you need to roll the snap beans, especially on lighter ground. If not, you'll get the ridges and maybe some small stones, and the guys that pick that do not like that. After the good luck of that, we did double crop after peas and wheat. When we double cropped after peas, if we planted north and south, with the peas we planted east and west. That'll eliminate the windrows of the peas. The pea harvesters, they windrow it. And if you go along with the row, you're going to have a really tough time, I don't care what you have, going through that. So we went the other way. And we had pretty good luck, very good luck. We actually, one of the things, there was a 40-acre piece, and we were going to get 3.5 inches of rain or something like that. And I was only plant half the field. 3 days later, 3 or 4 days later, we were planting the rest of the field and nobody else was doing it. There was nobody around. We had to plant more because we can get in there following wheat, strip tilling. And it was amazing. I think that's when my dad finally said, I'm glad you went to college. Now, weed management is comparable to conventional. It's definitely not better, but you can handle it. You can deal with it. It's not the best, it's not the worst. And I know that it beats working the ground 4 times and planting. I can tell you that. Now my summary is the management style of reduced tillage is drastically different than conventional. You're going to spend less time burning diesel in your tractor seat, more time in your office. You got to worry about the rotations, herbicide, carryovers, and the fertilizer recommendations. Remember, you're not tilling the ground. You're not chisel plowing linemen or moldboard plowing linemen. You got to go out there, you got to spread your potash in the winter. Let it work down through natural gravity and rain. You will get some movement from the shank and the closing discs, but remember, there's 15 to 20 inches that's not getting tilled. So your pH will rise in that top inch, and you need to address that. And when you're soil sampling, that's something you got to think of. Where am I going to soil sample? Am I going to soil sample every time in the furrow, or am I going to sporadically sample? That's something that is up for debate. Who really knows? And you'll have to figure it out. I don't know. I don't know if any of you guys know. I'd love to know about it.
You get acid roof yet?
What?
You get acid roof yet?
Not yet. This is only our second year. So, well, first full year, we tried some. And that leads to another thing. Start out at your own pace. We did not just do 1,500 acres at once. The year before, we did try some on sweet corn. And that, your own pace, maybe 5 acres and maybe 20 acres, whatever you want to do. Don't be pushed into it, but don't be scared about it. Talk to others and listen. Talk to him. He knows a lot. And he's actually very, very open to conversation, as I found out. And most importantly, stay positive. We're all going to have issues. Trust me, there were many times I wondered what I was doing, if I should move away, if I'm going to get kicked out. Stay positive. It does work out in the end. That's all I have to say. I think that's all I have. So that's it.
Thank you, Joe. Oh, he snuck off before anybody else could ask him questions. Anybody got any questions for him? Or
Same question, what do you do after harvest? What tillage?
question was, what does he do after harvest for tillage?
We will try to no-till on the cover crop, or we will spread it, so it's not by itself, or we will spread it and lightly disc it.
All right, have you seen any increase in diseases or insects because of that?
Well, it's our first year, so it's kind of hard.
All right.
So after harvest, he spreads a cover crop and either lets it germinate on its own, like sometimes he will, or lightly incorporates it with a disc. The couple things that Joe talked about: the nitrogen deep, crop leg getting to it sometimes. We did see that early on. Concerned me. The yield results in the end on the sweet corn when we were doing the deep place nitrogen. It concerned me because I could see yellow corn. The corn was yellower where the nitrogen was deep, but when we got all said and done and harvested, the yield was average almost 2 tons the acre more on those deep place nitrogen plots. But concern I've been aware of and awakened to, I guess, as of lately is the soil. As we improve the soil biological health with the reduced tillage and cover crops, the soil biological activity, microbes on the surface is where they are the most active on the top few inches, that they need nitrogen to survive. So they're consuming the nitrogen on the shallow part of your soil early on until things really get going. So there is a possibility under certain crops and certain fertility programs that you could be starving the crop of nitrogen somewhat if you do not apply some nitrogen in the seed grow area or close to the seed. But we're working on that. Joe talked about weeds and cultivating and that a few years ago we no-till our peas, and came time to harvest one piece of peas, an 80-acre block of peas. Got a heavy rain. Well, when it's time to harvest peas, they don't care if it rained or not. It's time to go, and they go. I got a call about 2 o'clock in the morning, needed me to bring my 4-wheel drive tractor down because one of the pea machines was stuck. That really excited, not the fact that they called me 2 o'clock in the morning excited me, but the fact that one of those, 30-ton machines or whatever was stuck out in my field. Yeah, they made a pretty good mess of the field. Like I say, an 80-acre block, and out of that we ended up doing some remedial tillage on it after the fact when it dried out some with a disc, trying to level the ruts out. That fall we follow peas with winter wheat, no-till the wheat. We have to go out and do a burn down before we plant to control the weeds, but anywhere we ran the disc over the ground to level the ground out, we got the ground leveled out, looked pretty good, but that field or that farm has a very high seed population of lamb's quarters, and about the only place the lamb's quarters grew was everywhere we ran the disc. It was like the thickest carpet of lamb's quarters, and it was right to the line where we ran the disc on all those spots. We went out and spot disc, if you want to say, all the ruts. But it's interesting what tillage wakens those seeds up, if you want to say, and brings them to life. But rain and field operations, it's amazing that not working this soil, tearing it up, that you get a rainfall on it. An inch of rain could disappear pretty fast on that ground, where a field next to you that they've been tilled up, you don't even want to get close to it. There's been several times that the processor has got a hold of us after a rain to either plant some sweet corn because nobody else can go. Matter of fact, this past spring, a year ago, I was out planting sweet corn one Monday morning, and they called me up and said, you got 50 acres of sweet corn you're supposed to plant. When do you think you can go? He about dropped in his seat when I told him I'm out going now. What's the matter? Well, it rained and nobody else can go. Or harvesting. They've called me up different times and said, we've had a lot of rain and they're having trouble everywhere else. What do you think about your block that's ready to come off? I said it shouldn't be any problem. They go out and, no problems. little tire tracks, lug marks, but other than that, goes good. But Joe did alert to the fact that you might not spend as much time in that tractor seat as you had before. You might not burn as much fuel. Where you're going to spend more time is sitting in the chair in the office, management. That's probably one of the biggest things, or biggest, what I want to say, time vacuums, if you want to say, is much more management goes into this. Conventional tillage, you go out, you plow it, you fit it, you plant it. You know what you're going to do. With this here, you're always looking at new ways to improve the bottom line, increase your efficiency. But I can't stress enough that management is much bigger part of the puzzle than is first led to be thought of. But, I've said enough on this. Now we're going to have Casey Coons give us an overview of their operation. Casey's the operation manager at Hemdale Farms. Diversified farm with approximately 3,000 acres of cabbage, green beans, sweet corn, vine crops, field corn, alfalfa, and wheat. They also operate a 700 cow dairy. And I do read in the country, folks, even though I'm not a dairy producer or produce milk, but I always look at the production. Go through when every month when they put the production report in there, how farms are going, and I go through the counties and people that I recognize, and they have a very respectable production record, and they also have some robotic milkers there too. So Casey's responsibilities include coordinating day-to-day cropping enterprises, overseeing equipment operations, maintenance, repair, replacement. Reduced tillage is a new effort on the farm. They've been working at it for a few years now, and Casey and I have had quite a few conversations over the years, and Dale and myself, but Casey, it's your turn.
Thanks, Don. I want to start out by thanking you for all the time and effort that you've put in and your willingness to share. I know a lot of people have called, and it's really helpful getting someone else's experience that's been in it a long time, so we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
First slide kind of speaks about our philosophy and how important soil health is to our farm and the crops and the animals that we have there. As Don mentioned, we've been at it a few years. We've gradually worked into this reduced tillage. We've kind of started by ripping in the fall, again to rip up some of this compaction created from vegetable harvest. Because as you mentioned, when it's time to harvest the vegetables, you have to go no matter what the weather is, and that can really destroy soil. So we started out that way with deep ripping in the fall, and then would go to just field cultivating in the spring, and destroying the cover crop or burning it down, and then gradually work through that. And there's some points I want to make. A lot of it, I think, has been reiterated here, and I think it's on kind of common themes from listening to the rest of us. Moldboard plowing, we feel, really addicts the soil to excessive tillage. It kind of perpetuates more tillage being needed. When you do start going to reduce tillage, you got to commit for it for 2 to 3 years. It takes a while to start this soil renewing process before you'll see the results. So, as Joe says, you got to stick with it. Requires more management. That's the same thing Don mentioned before. It does take more managing cover crop, the size of the cover crop, when you're going to burn it down, make it easier to work, especially with a transplanter. That doesn't lend itself quite as well to row cleaners and that sort of thing. So managing that size of the residue that you're working with is more important. Also, if you want to be planting over the slot, that requires a GPS, which takes a little more time to get used to, especially your first year. There's a learning curve there. But the soil will improve. You'll see it. We've seen this action on the soil. We've seen more earthworm activity. You can see that happening. And I've got pictures that'll show the results that we see when we're harvesting too. We used to do a lot of plowing. A lot of people used to do a lot of plowing. That's how you took care of the cover crop back then. But unless the conditions were just perfect and the moisture just right, it took a lot to get that to fit back down again so that you could plant well. We are still doing once in a while, we'll plow a bean field. Anu mentioned she actually maybe has seen a yield drag in beans, where all the other crops, the yield has stayed consistent, and that's what we've seen with the rest of the crops. With beans, we sometimes are still getting our best yield with plowing. We plowed one field last year, same reason, it was a heavy sod. It was a rented field, a new field to us. Didn't think the strip tiller would work well in there. We did have some good beans off of that. But this being our first year of following over the zone with our planter, our beans on the rest of our ground reduced tillage has been much better than it has been previously, where we just were going with the field cultivator. This shows our following with our field cultivator after we've made a pass with the zone building. When we're doing cabbage, we still feel we need the trough land in for weed control. So we're still incorporating trough land after we'll make a pass with the zone builder to put down the nutrients. This shows a pass of the zone building going on in the spring. We are set up to put liquid down. We're putting down a different amount depending on what the crop history is, what our soil tests are, and what our yield expectations are. As we mentioned before, it does take some more management, managing the residue and working with the GPS, but it's real critical to keep a gnat planter over the zone. This here is actually a picture of what we do in the fall. I've heard some questions of what people are doing in the fall. In the fall we'll go through, and that's where we'll rip. We're still finding 12 to 14 inches deep in the fall to get below, to break up a compacted layer. This is our same machine that we do the zone building with in the spring. In the spring it's a 12-row unit, running more like 8 to 10 inches deep. Putting down the liquid, we'll have the rolling baskets and the disc behind it. In the fall, we take off the 2 outside shanks. It's a little harder to pull it at 14 inches deep. We're taking off the rolling baskets and the disc. And then we're pulling an airway. Sometimes that helps incorporate the manure that we might put on in some of the fields, and also a cover crop that we'll put in. It'll help incorporate that as well. And that shows what an established cover crop will look like. We like to try to destroy the cover crop when it's 6 to 9 inches tall is what seems to work well, especially for cabbage. Part of the overall soil management, once we get going with zone tillage and reduce tillage, is then trying to manage the compaction as we go through our operations, and harvest especially. And one of the ways that we do that to help minimize it is with tracked vehicles and with flotation tires. Don was mentioning it's in the harvest time, especially when it's wet, when you can really visually see the difference between conventionally tilled fields and zone tilled fields. And we have seen it for years. We used to custom harvest beans and stuff. And it's a world of difference between conventional tilled and zone tilled. This here was a conventional tilled field of cabbage near us. This was us operating the same day. There is a little track there where we had a tram line where we'd be bringing back from the other end. We would follow the same path back out. But you can see all there is just a little bit of the wheel treads shown from the harvest, and very little rutting going on. We get much better water infiltration, and the soil structure improves, and that's one way you can measure and see the difference. So our goal is to get away from something like that in the fall, and to end up something like that The soil will improve. It takes some time to see it when you're first transitioning, but it's really well worth it at the end. So with that, take any questions if anybody has any. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, couple points Casey was talking about, the water infiltration part of it and that, we've seen that in our operation, and I guess what really hit the home run with me when I have landlords that make the comment to me that, I don't know what you're doing, but it must be right, because we don't have water that ponds on our land anymore like the neighbors do across the road that are conventionally tilled. Or, when they're paying attention and watching what you're doing and make positive remarks like that, or my garden doesn't get flooded anymore when it rains because the water used to run out of the field prior years, come down the edge of the road and fill my yard and garden. The snow geese don't have a pond to land on anymore in my field because we don't have a pond. I feel bad about that. They went somewhere else. But some of these reduced till tools, turbo disc, turbo till, NRCS, if you're in one of their programs, some of these they don't view real friendly. The Case IH turbo disc, I know there's some areas that they call it a full width tillage tool, I guess, even though this last fall we had our new district manager for our county. I was applying for the conservation stewardship program, and we put some cover crop. We put cover crops after our sweet corn, and we do have a turbo disc. I tell people I might have to rename that just to a turbo and forget the disc, but they have to come out and do a field and farm survey to check things, and I took them around to some of these fields where we put the cover crop on after the sweet corn. We airflow it on, mix it with potash. Generally we put potash, sometimes a little ammonium sulfate, but we'll airflow the cover crop in, some fertilizer on. We get even distribution that way, and then we run over the ground with the turbo, approximately 2 inches deep. We've done this for 2 years now, and cover crop establishment with this tool is just phenomenal. And when he came out for the farm survey, I took him around to some. Of course, I had to show him all the fields, and took him to the fields where we put the cover crop on and ran over it with the turbo. And he was very impressed with the amount of residue that was left on top. We had good coverage and all that, but the powers to be above him are the ones that really make the decision now. So I know in lesser publications, their No-Till Farm magazine, there was an article about it that some of these minimum till tools and NRCS's view on them is not very favorable, that maybe more of us need to start making noise about it. And there's places out there that I could see, very rolling ground, hilly ground, where maybe this tool would not be advisable to use, but there's a lot of other places where they can be very beneficial. But with that, I'm turning it over to Ron Wagner from Wagner Farms in Rome, New York. Ron has 35 acres of mixed vegetables, and they're known for their potatoes, farm stand, farmers markets, greenhouse, plant sales in the spring. You pick currants, raspberries, and gooseberries, and homemade wreaths and Christmas trees. So Ron, I'm going to turn the table over to you. Thank you. Thank you.
I started farming about 1998 officially. I was farming for about 5 years before that, involved with FFA, as many of you probably were too. I have fought the system 100% all the way. Started out a couple acres here and there, had a little muck farm, a lot of small tractors, a couple small pieces of equipment. Gradually I moved up in the world and got into a little larger scale. And around 2006, we were running about 75 acres of crops. running it all on one tractor, working 18-hour days, 180 days a year at least. 2006 was a bad year. As many of us know, it was a very wet year. We had many floods. And despite having crops when no one else did, I went bankrupt. And thought that was the end of it. 07 was bankruptcy year. I didn't do anything. My mom took over the farm, ran the farm. We did all right, covered the bills, covered the expenses that year. In 2008, I started with a clean slate. I was able to keep all my equipment, keep everything. I started looking at ways of conserving money and making things more economical. And of course, around 2008, fertilizer prices started pushing almost $1,000 a ton towards the end of the growing season. Conventional tillage was my main tillage tool. Go in, aerate, plow. And of course in 2008 I had downsized muckload. I was down to 35 acres, big load off the tractor. The conventional tillage methods I was using at the time was moldboard plowing. Originally I started out with big heavy set discs. And of course, big heavy set discs, you have to go over it 2 or 3 times and make it look good. Try to fit the ground. I gradually transitioned over to a Effecta 2 field cultivator, which I love, and to this day I use almost 90% of the time. Very rarely use a set of discs in the field any longer, except for in the fall if I'm trying to chop down stubble or chew up residue. The idea of going to a reduced tillage system, back around 2005, I sort of messed around with it via a subsoiler and trying to eliminate some compaction layers. I did that on a tomato crop that year, and it was one of our best tomato crops ever. We went in, subsoiled the whole entire field, laid the mulch, did everything we could. It was a dry summer. The tomatoes did phenomenal. They did not drought stress. We irrigated once or twice. That's all we had to do. By going with the subsoiler, going 28, I went 28 inches deep with it. I hit it really hard, really deep. I gave those roots of those plants the opportunity to go deep on their own, to find the water source, to find the moisture, to find the nutrients that had leached down deep in the soil over the years. At that point, I became convinced that going to reduced or to get the root systems down deeper in this ground was a priority. And this past year, in 2010, I had the opportunity to use a Universe 130 zone builder from Freeville. Okay, I had a couple $8,000-9,000 piece of equipment given to me for free to demo and try out. You know what? Sounds good to me. What can it hurt? I tried it on sweet corn and cucumbers first. The sweet corn, I did it on my white sweet corn on a second and third planting, and I did it right next to the second or first planting, actually, of white sweet corn on conventional tilled soil. So I had a side-by-side comparison. The white sweet corn that was on the zone build didn't lodge, didn't fall over, yielded just as well as this conventional. However, the conventional lodged. Real pain in the butt to pick it, definitely. I didn't do anything different than the fertilizer. We use broadcast on our fertilizer program. We do some liquid infurl when we plant. And at the same time I did the first planting, the second and third planting of late sweet corn, I did the cucumbers. I did not have success with that. I lead that to the fact that we had heavy rains just after we planted, and the small seed of cucumber actually wound up being washed down in the soil, down in the subsoil ridges deeper than it should have. I also believe the soil crusted just a little on top, which hindered it from germinating correctly. All right, later this past summer, I decided we could get this on road again, so we decided we're going to do our entire fall crop of cole crops: broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Chinese cabbage, kohlrabi, you name it, I put it in on it. I went a little excessive. I didn't plan on the field and what I was going to use it for originally, and I didn't go in and spray it with Roundup. I wish I had, because I would have saved a lot of energy and a lot of time. Instead, I went up the day I went ahead and I chisel plowed the field. I disked it twice. I ran the Perfecta over it with a roller. I got it all nice, uniform, flat, weed-free. The following day, I went over it with the Zone Builder. Now, the Zone Builder, 2 rows, and I was running it 14 inches deep in the ground, which is about 2 inches below my compaction layer. I was running around 5 miles an hour with a 55-horse tractor, 4-wheel drive, fully loaded with weights. A lot of equipment on the back. First time I sat in the ground, I didn't even know it was there. It just pulled so nice and easy in the ground. The field I went with for the cole crops has a problem though. Conventional plowing of it is hard because the top end is a clay loam. You go down the middle of it, it's clay. Those two, the depth control is pretty decent at it. You can control it. You can get the plows in the ground, even in the dry weather. However, the far end is a gravel knoll, and because of the gravel, the hard pan and the gravel layer, the plows right up out of the ground, and only maybe you get in the ground 2 or 3 inches at the most. The Zone Builder, however, we got down 14 inches, and we stayed at 14 inches right through that gravel knoll. Ooh, you know what? This might be good. This might actually transplant. And normally, the standard transplanters, you want your soil to be plowed pretty deep for the transplanter to actually work the way it's supposed to. So on the gravel knoll, the transplanter was usually, well, okay, lift it up, we're not going to plant here, just turn around, go back. This year we wound up planting right from one end of the field to the other, right through that gravel knoll with no problems. Day after I zone build that field, we had approximately 2 to 3 inches of rain that following day. And I was like, well, zone builder got picked up, and I bet you I'm going to be hurting here because I can't get back in that field. It's going to be all crusted over. Conventionally tilled field would have been crusted over completely. It would have been impossible to go in with the transplanter and transplant on top of that. However, taking a risk, we put the transplanter on. About 5 days after we zone built it, we started transplanting the cole crop about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. By nightfall, we were 3/4 of the way done planting, and we had no problems. It went in the ground, it stayed in the ground. The zones were nice and fluffy, full width of the baskets, which I think we're running about 12 inches wide on the baskets. The zone itself was 14 inches. Took a metal rod out with me, a couple spots, pushed it down through. Nice, right? 14, 15 inches deep. Transplanters were perfect. All right, looking good. We went in and irrigated the following day. We set irrigation on the field, and we ran about 3/4 of an inch of rain on the field. And we did this for 3 days. We could move the sprinklers around it over the 3-day period. We got it all watered in. We did not have to irrigate again for another 2 weeks after that, and this was in the middle of a pretty dry spell in the end of July that we had. Normally, I would have had to irrigate it 2 or 3 times, probably 5 days apart. I didn't have to worry about it. Saved me a lot of headaches. The benefit to the zone building was that it did, once that surface was sealed, it kept the moisture in that. It allowed the roots to go down deep. It allowed them to find the moisture. We also, at the same time as zone building, we had broadcasted fertilizer, so the fertilizer was already in the ground, it was ready to go. We did not use any liquid, we didn't use any water or liquid fertilizer at the time of transplanting, which was a risk at the time, but it paid off. The coal crop did phenomenal this year. About halfway through the growing season in August, we had one weekend where we got 4 inches of rain in one day. Normally that field would pool up. You'd have 12 inches of water sitting in a low spot. Okay, crop is lost, right? We had no water standing in the field at all. The spot where it normally would be pulled up, yeah, the tire tracks had a little bit of water standing in them. That was it. The rows themselves were quite muddy, but the tire tracks, you'd walk on them, you could actually drive on them if you had to. The harvest came in on it about September. We started picking broccoli and cabbage. The broccoli heads we were hauling out of that field were 10 to 12 inch diameter, consistent yield, harvesting it every 3 days. The cabbage was averaging 6 to 8 pound size. We were wholesaling it, we were retailing it, farmers market, you name it, we were doing it with it. Everyone loved the quality. I loved the quality. I didn't have to worry about being selective about picking it for once. I didn't have to worry about it because in the past I've had broccoli lodge on me, fall over, get in the mud. This year I didn't do it. So I was fortunate there. This fall, I decided we'd try it again, and I did it on my garlic field actually. I zone build the garlic rows. I believe by doing zone builds of plant the garlic roots.
For our area, 16 inches seemed to be the correct number. Harvestability of crops, crop loss, stuff like that. Since 1996, when we first started experimenting with zone till, the only sweet corn that ever got bypassed in the field above and beyond excess yields was some conventional we had one year that the quality wasn't good enough. That was when we were still in the transition phase, if you want to say, and part of our acreage was conventional and part of it was zone till because I wasn't quite brave enough to go all the way yet, but that one particular year we had some conventional sweet corn that got bypassed because the quality and yield was not good enough, but yet all of our zone tilled corn got harvested that year. So I think that was the year I finally decided that enough's enough. I'm giving up on the conventional. Seed the soil or root the soil contact is critical. Whatever you do to the ground, you need to have good contact. You know, seed bed preparation is important. Now we're going to hear from Jim Wilson from Wilson Farms. Jim farms 600 acres in New Hampshire with 32 acres in Lexington, Maine. Maine is located in Michigan from Boston, 12 miles from Boston. He grows pumpkins, squash, sweet corn, carrots, and crops on raised beds. Jim has a subsoiler, but those pesky racks were a problem. He now has a straight shank under first zone builder. He has a compaction problem and has, this one's throwing me a little Phytophthora capsica. Okay, I wasn't good in English. French, French, I never took it, so Italian or Latin or whatever. A dreaded root, crown, and fruit disease of yeah. You'll have to say it for me because Solanaceae and cucurbit crops. He has done 3 years of classic zone tillage in New Hampshire. The system works well for pumpkins, squash, sweet corn. He uses zone till on raised beds. The farm has 75 crops. I guess he's diversified. 2 years ago, he lost 80% of his carrots. This year, after planting them on zone-built beds, he had to buy bigger bags because the carrots were too big. With this, I'll turn it over to Jim. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks. Good. Thank you. The advantage to going last here is that basically everything you wanted to say has already been said. And we farm about 600 acres in New Hampshire. Up there, we do the classic crops. All of our larger space-consuming crops are all up there. And generally, what everybody else has spoken about today is the type of thing that we do. In Lexington, we've been farming for 127 years. We get 3 crops a season off of every bit of it. And we grow a lot of quick turnover, smaller crops. And between the 2 crops, between the 2 farms, we do about 125 different crops. Basically raising everything we can for our retail stores at both locations. And we've done this will be our 4th year in New Hampshire. It's worked so well up there with what we've been doing that we decided, we've had some serious compaction issues in Lexington, where we're turning over the land 3 crops per season. It's an awful lot of tractor trips. Now, so we kind of hadn't heard of anybody doing this type of an application, but we're gamblers like every farmer, and we bought a second machine, and we tossed our 3 shanks together. We can put 3 rips on a 5-foot bed, and it's improved drainage tremendously. You walk across the farm and you forget after a wet period, and step on that plastic, your foot will disappear. We've also noticed huge improvements in irrigation issues. I think it's some of the economic analysis that people I've heard earlier today. You've talked about total yields, etc. We found that the products are coming off cleaner and better. Pumpkins are cleaner in New Hampshire. Lettuce this year, hot, dry season. We do them all from transplants, 128 plugs. We're throwing right into these zones. We do them by hand. We transplant them right behind these. What we would do in this application, we haven't been putting plastic, as you see here, and what we would do is we would come down once with the bedder, prepare the ground, once with the bedder, right down with the zone till, and then the bedder the opposite direction to smooth off the bed, and then seed as we always would. I did not have a single head of lettuce bolt this summer, and in a hot, dry year. Generally, you plant a 128 plug, and you grind it up after you've harvested, and you see basically the same plug with a few little hair roots sticking out. This year, I got down a couple of times and dug out, and as best I could with my hands, and you'd find root zones that were beyond the canopy of the lettuce. And I think that had a whole lot to do with the fact that we didn't have anything bolt. This is just a long-term view of what we were doing there. This is all zucchini field, and this is going to be, we run down with the plastic right behind the zone till we get to the end of the field, turn it around and come back. Biggest mistake we made this year, as I said, as was said in the previous notes, a couple of years ago, I had a field that very limited as to where I could plant on this 30 acres. So I put my carrots in what I knew was a pretty poor spot. It was a heavy, wet year. We lost probably 80% of our carrot crop to forking. And I sent it out for analysis. I was sure it was nematode. And
and they came back clean. It was nothing but soil compaction, which is really what prompted us to try to figure a solution here. This year, the carrots came, I've been using that same bag to sell carrots in my market for 25 years. This is the first year we could barely seal the bag because of the length of the carrots. And I think when you talk an economic analysis too, a carrot that's 3 inches longer is going to be 20% heavier. So the tonnage you're taking out of a field, it just makes sense that that would be a definite improvement. You know, you can see a close-up of the same type of thing. It's just it's phenomenal. And not only that, but these carrots, that bag is 16 inches long. Those are 14 inches long, and they're not horsey at all. Very, very good, very tender. Tomatoes, I noticed this year with the crop, we did it just as we did with the zucchini. They ripped right underneath the plastic. When I went to, first of all, we had the best crop of tomatoes I've ever seen. And one of the things about it was, you know, it was a good tomato year. It was hot, it was dry, they were early, but the vigor on the plants was tremendous. And I noticed when we finally finished the end of the season, we got beyond frost, I had to go out and chop them up. It took me 2 more passes with the rotovare to grind up the vines because the root system was that much larger. You know, I'd noticed little things in the field. You'd walk by a field of beets, and at noontime in the heat of the day, you'd see it just slightly wilting. Normally, you just grab some irrigation pipes and run at it. And, well, you got busy. I was running drip that day. I came back at 4 o'clock, and they were standing straight up. The sun just that little bit cooler, a little bit better condition. And so you don't have to panic quite as much. We're finding, again, I think a huge part besides the fuel and the time savings as far as setting fields up is obviously also the fact that you do not have to irrigate anywhere near as much of the system. The root systems justify themselves, and I think the quality of the plants is the biggest part. And really, that's about all I had to say. Most of the heavy hitter was taken by the guys in front of me. But are there any questions? This is different. Yeah.
What's your soil type?
It's a heavy loam. This is the heavy loam in Lexington. New Hampshire is a sandy loam. Sandy loam in New Hampshire. We're down on the Merrimack River, you know, just right on the river.
Those flatbeds or raised beds you're making?
Those are going to be raised. Those happen to be flatbeds for the zucchini, but everything else is grown on raised beds. Now we're growing things like, I didn't mention, baby spinach. You've got a 24-day turnover from seed to harvest, and that has got to be 100% clean. Any debris in the field, you can't do it. So that's why we're forced to be. We've always been high-till. I use no herbicides at all on the farm in Lexington. I cultivate a tremendous amount. I know what the detriments are to that, but we're bringing high-value crops off, and we feel we can control it. We've kept the farm clean. It's extremely rare to see any weeds go to seed at all on the Lexington farm. We patrol it every day.
Did you try one shank, or did you just go right to 3?
We went right to 3. We were trying to lay out. To save some money, I was thinking, well, maybe 2's the number, and we could pull it with a little bit less horsepower. But my guy who does most of my tractor work for me, he said, no, if we're going to do it all, you know, both feet in, and I'm glad we did.
How many rows of carrots do you have on that bed now?
Three rows on the bed.
3 rows?
3 rows,
Yeah.
it's 40 inches at the top of the bed.
Okay, 3 rips and 3 rows.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when you're doing, what's the sequence of events when you're building a raised bed? Say that again.
Well, at the beginning of the season, we would plow as always, and we prepare the soil. We'd flatten it out with a power harrow. Then you come down once with the bedder, and then rip the bed. And it would be a little bit uneven because of the ripping process. And then one more pass with the bedder, and then seed as normal.
And then you put the plastic on at that point.
Well, either plastic or bare ground. Anybody? Yeah.
And it hasn't been too soft for going in with like baby spinach on the top.
It's that second pass with
that
the bedder
really does ferment enough.
that's just enough.
Okay.
And it doesn't settle. No, surprisingly, if you get a rain immediately after, or generally you know, it's a small scale farm. I mean, and, you know, we would normally seed and honestly move the pipes in and overhead irrigate within a half an hour of planting, trying to get germination out. And we don't see any, you know, nothing falls down. Anybody? Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Is there any questions for any other speakers before everybody bows out? They're here. It's a good opportunity to ask them questions if you have any.
I guess I'd like to know what, for some of you, you think you might try next. Like Tim, do you see changing anything or doing anything new or different this next year?
We did 100. I mean, we generally jump both feet when we jump, and we did every bed on the farm was done this way last year. Now it was a dry year. Next, you know, you almost guarantee this year will be a wet year. So we're going to find out what the differences are, and you make all those small adjustments after.
How about Mike?
We're actually going to try a little bit of cabbage and some broccoli this year, and probably some beets. Oh, excuse me. We're going to try some cabbage and broccoli this year, and also we grow a couple acres of beets, so we're going to start messing around with a few things like that. Only because, like I say, everything we've tried it on, we've loved it on, so I don't see any reason not to try it on everything, eventually.
This will be the first year that with the GPS that we'll be able to follow in the spring the slot that we cut in the fall. So we'll be putting on our liquid fertilizer and doing our zone building right over the same slot we cut in the fall, and then of course following the plant growth on May.
I want to try biostrip tilling with the radishes.
Probably banding fertilizer and furrow this time.
I guess the big thing we're going to do is I got another planter coming. We're going to do twin rows. We're going to try twin rows and follow over the zone behind the zone tiller, strip tiller. Compare that to our 30-inch rows.
How far apart?
They're going to be 7 or 8 inches apart. So if we drive right, they'll be straddling the strip. Going to try to compare apples to apples as best we can. Have the planter set up so that the fertility program is the same as our 30-inch row planter, and then obviously try pushing some populations above and beyond that on another replicated strip somewhere. But I want to compare what I'm doing now with a twin row and see if there's an improvement, and then try any advancements from that. But sweet corn, soybeans, grain corn.
How far apart would the rows be between the twin rows? Like, you have 2 and 2, are they going to still be at 30?
There's going to be, well, they're going to be centered on 30-inch rows.
Centered on 30.
Centered, so there's going to be approximately 22 inches between the rows, so we'll still be able to get down through with the row crop sprayer. So, always looking and trying.
Thank you, John. We put off our planner decision a year, so we're real happy.
Well, I tried a year ago to several equipment companies to see if we could get one to do, I mean, I call this an experiment. You know, I got a $50,000 experiment going on, but, you know, God and things were good to me last year, so I was able to justify it, but I decided I was going to jump into it. I wasn't going to wait, you know, try and check with the equipment companies again and see if or see what, and I didn't want to go to a 12-row. The dealer tried to sell me a 12-row unit. So when I buy something, I want to buy something for the future, not something for yesterday. So we're looking at the newest technology, and you know, if the equipment company recommends this, or what they recommend, you know, I kind of go by recommendations or talking with other people that are using it. But you know, back to the transition phase. We're transitioning for the future, not for the history behind us. So sometimes there's not a lot of opportunity to check with people or to find out what works and what doesn't work, or what to buy and what not to buy. So sometimes you have to go out on a limb. And, you know, myself, I hope it works and I fall in love with it. Or the bailout, I hope somebody else likes it better than I do, so I can get rid of it. But fortunately for us, you know, what we've done, it's all worked. If it doesn't work, find out why it didn't work. But, as was said here, Joe and Casey and Ron and Jim and that, you know, don't be afraid to talk to people that are doing it. That's your best source of information. There's people out there that are doing it. You know, I go to these national no-till conferences, and there's people from around the world that come to these. And you know, not everything works the same everywhere, but you'll find different pockets around the country, around the world that go through the same situation, same circumstances that you have. You know, you go out in Ohio now, and you talk about no-till coolers and row cleaners. Majority of the people out in Ohio, they certainly have God's dirt because they're taking all these attachments off. They're just going out with a planter and planting. Well, I know from past experience, we can't do that on our soil here in New York. We have to add all those options on there to get back to that seed to soil contact. Fertility management. You know, there's a lot of growers out west now. You know, the big talk is starter fertilizer. What do you need that for? You know, our fertility's good enough, but now test results are coming in, you know, comparisons that a little starter fertilizer is showing some benefits, particularly phosphorus. Get phosphorus by that seed, you know, get it going. But, I could go on for the rest of the night if I wanted, but we're supposed to adjourn at 5:30, and so if there's any other questions or anybody here,
Please do the evaluation, and remember, if you're interested in a demo, there's some sign-up sheets on the back.
Thanks, Don.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.